Well, good afternoon. I trust those of you that have been able to attend some of the sessions earlier today have just already gleaned a lot from lots of the sessions that have been held. We want to congratulate Sri Lanka on their first Internet Day, and we are delighted to be able to bring to you this session, which is on the role of digital payments and fintech in making digital inclusion ubiquitous in Sri Lanka. It's a really interesting topic, and I'm delighted this afternoon to have with me here such a distinguished panel. I'm going to take a few minutes just to introduce them, and then we're going to get started with the session proper. Got a lot to cover, so we're going to try and actually keep to time and just try and get through so that you as a participant are able to get the maximum from this session today. I'm delighted to have with us on the panel Mr. Conrad Dias. Conrad is CEO of LOLC Finance, and he's been with LOLC for a long period of time. As he was sharing, his background has been both in technology and in financial services. And he's an experienced veteran, if I may use the word, in the fintech space, and has been behind many of the innovations that have been already deployed in Sri Lanka. He's also on the board of lots of the international arms of LOLC, and all of these countries have the opportunity to glean from his expertise. Conrad, for many of you, I'm sure you already know, but for those who don't, he was also the founder and CEO of iPay in Sri Lanka. Next, we have on the panel Mr. Channa de Silva. Channa is General Manager and CEO of LankaClear, a place in which he's already innovated and rolled out many innovative solutions that are already benefiting consumers or customers in Sri Lanka. He's had over 25 years of experience in the multinational industry and across many local organizations. As I was reading through Channa's, I've known Channa for a while, but reading through his resume, I was just so taken up with the many firsts that he's had the opportunity to be a part of. He, in fact, was one of the engineers that was responsible for the first dedicated internet connection in Sri Lanka. How awesome is that? He was also the first being part of just the online newspapers that was rolled out, online radio in Sri Lanka, Wi-Fi network in Sri Lanka. That's just phenomenal. Not everybody gets to have so many firsts just across this industry. And I'm sure today, as we go through this session, you'd see obviously just the experience that he brings to a forum like this. I'm also delighted to have Dr. Pragnell. Brad is a dear friend, and he's here in Sydney with me. Brad is the principal with 34 South, 45 North, a financial services consulting company here in Sydney. Brad has been involved with financial services policy for over 30 years, providing thought leadership, meaningful outcomes for the industry, member organizations, the stakeholders, and also the regulators. He's currently an executive consultant with Payments Canada, and he's closely involved in driving lots of their modernization that's even currently taking place. In addition to that, Brad's also worked across a number of Asian markets. But here in Australia, Brad, between the years 2008 and 2016, was the head of industry policy at the Australia Payments Clearing Association, APCA as we know it. And during this period, he led research, policy development, and government regulator, stakeholder relations for the associations. In fact, the work that he did was instrumental even with the launch of the NPP here in Australia in 2018. So we're just delighted to have all of these panelists today to participate in our discussion. My name is Niranjan Sundararaj. I've also been in the payments industry for over 30 years, serving across Asia and then in Australia, New Zealand, and in Korea. And I'm just delighted just to be able to moderate this session and look at some things that as we think about digital inclusion in Sri Lanka, are worthy of our time and consideration. So welcome again to our audience. And I want to just welcome the panel too. It's good to see all of you.
Thank you.
In our session today, as far as the objectives of the session, we're going to actually focus on some critical areas. The first is we're going to discuss the evolution that's taking place across digital payments in the banks and in the fintech space that's being powered through technology, data, and digital. So that's the first segment that we're going to look at. The second, we're going to then look at some of the regulations and how regulations in industry can collaborate together to bring about the right balance between competition and compliance. And we look at that across a number of areas in order to be able to provide all customers in Sri Lanka with a choice and with a level of service as we think about a digital environment that is ubiquitous. And then finally, we're going to also look at some key considerations and some challenges that we probably are encountering, not just in Sri Lanka, but across many other countries, and would love to be able to understand how some of the other countries are going to be approaching this. Through the session, I'm sure you're going to be sending out some questions. I'm going to just have a look at those questions and ensure that the ones that are relevant to the topics that we're going to discuss here, we're going to just actually kind of call those out and just benefit from such the panel that we have. So that said, I'm going to get started with our first segment. And Channa, if you don't mind, I'd like to actually just kick off this session with you. And the question that I have for you, Channa, is why is financial inclusion important to a country like Sri Lanka? And how are banks embracing digital payments and digital banking across the space? I'd love for you to actually just kind of take a moment to share with us what the current landscape is like.
Thank you, Niranjan. Yeah, first I'll let me put some statistics in order for all the audience as well as the panelists to sort of get familiarized with. So these are statistics from January 2021. So we have a population in Sri Lanka of 21.4 million. But the interesting component of that is out of that population, 81% is rural. Only 19% lives in urban areas. The second one is we have a impressive mobile phone penetration. Actually, I think it's distribution of SIMs in the market. We have distributed 30.4 million SIMs, which is more than the population, which is 142% of the population. Then we have interesting fact, we have almost 10.9 million internet users, which is 51% of the population. And then we have the most important fact, active social media users, we have 7.9 million, which is about 37% of the population, which is the low-hanging fruit for moving into any digital. But again, also we have another important fact. We have gathered that through the ATM network, where more than 65% of the users access ATMs in local languages, in single hand Tamil. So obviously, the usage you need local. So considering all that, I think the financial sector is looking at three areas in terms of how financial inclusivity can benefit a country like Sri Lanka. First one is obviously the economic saving. Now, if you really look at this 21.4 million population, a majority of them are still dealing in cash. Even though we have a lot of digital instruments. According to the Payments Bulletin of Central Bank, which is a public document, Q3 2020, the currency in circulation is about 775 billion. And it's a well-known fact through research in the region that a country spends almost 1.5% of GDP to maintain, print, distribute, clean, recycle, and provide security to cash in circulation, right? And compare this with the spend on education which Sri Lanka did. The figure is only available for 2018, which is 2.1%. And 2019 and 20 would be definitely less than 3%. And whereas we are spending 1.5% on GDP on cash, and let's say if we can move 30% of the population, we are going to save 0.5% GDP, which can be utilized for social welfare and other programs beneficial for citizens. The second benefit that we are going to get is the foreign exchange saving. So we have had so many payment modes and payment cards, international players in the market. And we have done a rough estimate of at least we are because even when we are using an international payment mode, even though more than 95% of the transactions are local, we are losing foreign exchange because it's actually going through an international switch. So in excess of 6 billion, I would say with the COVID, it has probably increased more. We are losing foreign exchange for local transactions. So if we convert all these transactions, a majority to local payment modes, I think Australia, I think you can hear from Brad, they have this least cost routing kind of options. If we can enable those, we are going to save a lot of foreign exchange, especially given the COVID, where we are not earning much foreign exchange. The inflows have sort of almost ceased, and we are losing foreign exchange for local transactions. So that's the second benefit. And the third benefit is obviously access to credit. A majority of the SMEs, which is contributing to more than 50% of our businesses in the country, right? And most of them deal in cash in, cash out, and cash tills, right? So in that sense, they never deposit, even though we have a large amount of population with bank accounts, which I will cover in the next question. They deal in cash. So the cash never goes and hits a bank account. So the bank never gives them credit, even though they make a significant amount of money, in terms of revenue or income for a month. They never have access to credit because their income is not recorded in a bank. It's all dealt in, cash out. Right? So if they move into digital payments, over a 6 months period, they will start building a credit history and suddenly become credit worthy. Now, the only alternative for them right now is go to all this informal sector and get loans from what we call loan sharks and sort of pay 10% interest a day and get into this loan trap, and they can never get out. They have to sell their assets, right? So these are significant benefits if we can move, especially the 81% of the population which are rural, into that. And actually banks focus, people like Conrad, I think he will cover that. The focus has been how do we move into these rural areas and get people on board so that we will get more and more benefits. So there are lots of applications and other modes that are implemented and introduced, and which we will cover in the second and third questions. Back to you, Niranjan.
Thank you, Channa. That was thank you for actually just laying the groundwork, just those statistics and just how those actually then the transition to digital, how that can actually impact the economy, as you talked about there across those three areas, are significant. Conrad, I want to actually just have a question for you actually on the back of that. You've been a veteran with the fintech space. Could you just share with us some examples of digital payments and digital solutions that have been deployed within the finance space by fintech industries that actually kind of address some of those things that Channa was just talking about?
Certainly. Thank you, Niranjan, and thank you very much for inviting FITIS to inviting me for this session. So good afternoon, everyone. And I think Channa iterated very valuable statistics, especially when it comes to the population who's living in rural area. But unfortunately, if you really look at it, still they are not. I think if you look at the banking segment, even though that we have this number of SIMs distributed, still the digital adoption is not up to the level that I think all the banks want or the fintechs want. Having said that, I think there are many solutions that have been deployed in the recent past, especially soon after the COVID. Every bank, every financial institute, and I think every fintech got the opportunity in terms of getting into this space and changing the behavior of the customer. So, for example, if you take us when we are running through LankaClear Finance company, we are doing the iPay as a platform, not only as a group level, also we are doing the platform. We saw tremendous growth in terms of the platform. Similarly, I think many other platforms which are deployed in Sri Lanka for the payment phase, if you look at only for the payment phase only, I think there have been a lot of uptake by the customers. Having said that, what I see is still, I don't think that we are still addressing the total solution of the community that which Channa spoke about. So there is a tremendous opportunity for all of us in the banking sector to go there in terms of not limiting ourselves to a payment. Payment is only, in my view, it's only a one equation of the problem, right? So the payment is a need. Yes, when you buy something, you need to make a payment. So that's only a one element of a transaction. But there are so many other elements that you need to look at. And financial inclusion means it doesn't mean that just facilitating payments. It's in my view, it's facilitating the entire 365-degree view of the customer's needs of finance, including the savings, including access to finance. So that is one of the perennial problems that I see that this industry will have, especially in Sri Lanka, since Channa mentioned about the cost of cash, what is being spent 1.5% of the GDP. In order to take that out, I think we need to create the right topic that we are discussing, how we make it ubiquitous for the digital payments in terms of as a country. So in order to do that, I think we need to make that the customer as a payment, not as a payment platform, but banks have to give them the total solution. I'll take one simple example in terms of a rural farmer or a rural person who's living in the rural area, especially if they're doing farming or if they are doing any other agricultural or even for that matter working in that particular area. So there in Sri Lanka, of course, the bank penetration is very high. The bank branch penetration is very high. But still, if a rural farmer is still dependent on the cash and the cash economy, what he gets in terms of his services, what he renders, or the products he sells is cash. And for him to go and take that cash and bank it and stay in a queue and bank it in a bank account, it doesn't make sense because it will take his time, which is there for him to go and deposit the money. So that then depositing the money, the banks, if you really look at it, they don't want small accounts. It's just an account and you deposit the money. And then if the needs of that person, farmer, is on a day-to-day basis, he can only pay through cash. So when he wants to pay through cash, he needs to come back to the bank, probably either by bus or walking or fair amount of distance, go to an ATM. And sometimes, unfortunately, this withdrawal of cash is also, you have to pay a certain amount of money and then take the cash out and then fulfill his need. So we are not meeting that total need of that rural economy in terms of taking out the cash from the ecosystem. So I think that is something that we need to identify. So that is what some of these payment apps are now trying to do. Of course, the adoption is good, but it's not good enough to change that culture. So I think that is something that we all need to address in the long run. How do we get that the rural farmer or rural economy move out from the real cash-based economy to a digital cash-based economy or a digital payments? So that is something that I think it's very, very important to address from payment app perspective or a fintech company's perspective. So there are many fintechs today that who's trying to do that. But I think let's discuss what needs to be done at a later stage of this.
Yeah, absolutely. We've got a lot to cover, so I'm going to just try and see if we can actually just, we can listen to you for a long time, but we've got a hard stop in an hour. So if you could keep the responses kind of, shorter, that would be great as we move forward. But Conrad, thank you. You just touched on some things there that are really important. Brad, I want to just come on to you, actually. I've got a question for you. What are the trends then that you're seeing in the payments ecosystem which encompass actually just both the financial institutions as well as the fintech side? And I know, Channa talked about, Sri Lanka, 81% of the population being rural is a significant factor to keep in mind, and the internet penetration, etc. But just tell us, what is it that you're seeing? What are some of the trends?
Yeah, Niranjan, thank you very much again. And I'd like to thank the organizers for inviting me to this panel and being with this esteemed group. I'm really looking forward to the discussion. In terms of the trends that we're seeing, so internationally, we're seeing a lot of the trends not too dissimilar with what Channa highlighted earlier on. We're definitely seeing a move away from cash and check and towards electronic. So COVID, in particular, the pandemic over the past 12 months has seen a very significant shift. In some jurisdictions, we've seen a 50% drop in certain types of payment instruments, in ATM withdrawals, use of checks in some jurisdictions. In some other jurisdictions, maybe not as deep, but we've definitely seen an acceleration of a move away from cash and checks. And we've definitely seen a move towards the use of electronic and card-based payments. So the pandemic has accelerated those trends, and those trends have been going on for a good 10, 15 years. So I think once we come out of the pandemic over the coming months, we'll definitely see those trends continue, I would see. So we are seeing some really radical changes in consumer behavior. On the fintech side and on the supply side, I think one of the things we're seeing, and I'd just like to pick up a bit on what Conrad was talking about, was that I think what we're going to be seeing more of is banks working with partners who provide technology and platforms, but also with fintechs. One of the great things that fintechs can do that I think banks and payment service providers don't necessarily have the capacity or the expertise in is solving really specific use cases. Banks are very good at meeting a wide range of needs within the economy and a wide range of customers. But when you get down to that very specific use case, you really want to be able to partner with someone who does have expertise. So I think looking at the rural issues, you're looking at issues of cash, you're looking at specific industry, specific use cases. I think that's where really fintech has the real ability to meet those needs in a very effective and efficient way.
That's good, Brett. Thank you for that. Just then building up on that and then looking at Sri Lanka again. Conrad, if you don't mind, I'd love to just direct this next question towards you. Where do you believe fintechs can add the greatest value towards making digital payments ubiquitous in Sri Lanka? So this is just building on exactly where you kind of just left off.
Okay, thank you. I think Brad just touched on it. I think the partnering is the very key important thing. I think the fintechs, in my view, I don't think that the fintechs can play a role on its own. It needs to be embedded and engaged with the banks and the banking system. In terms of doing that, I think partnering with how big the fintech is, how big the bank is, it doesn't make any sense if you don't partner and collaborate. So that is something that I think that is one of the key things that they need to look at it. And the second part of it, I think the fintechs also need to understand when it comes to payments. I think we are or a fintech player is fighting against, at least in the Sri Lankan context, if you look at it, you're fighting against the cash, not with another product. So you're trying to take out the cash as the equation from the system rather than another product. So you need to look at in terms of how do you do that by looking at not cash is always, even though there is a cost to the central bank or the government in terms of maintaining cash is free flowing in terms of the economy at this given moment because we are a cash-led economy. So in order to do that, they need to look at it, how can you monetize your fintech in terms of the services that you provide to customers, not by purely looking at the transaction revenue. So that is something that I think you need to look at it in terms of the Sri Lankan context, because you're competing against a zero cost cash, because unless otherwise the customer goes and bank it to the banking system and then withdraw it from the banking system. Today they are keeping it under the pillow and they're using that cash in the rural area. So when you have that kind of a scenario, then what you need to look at it in terms of how do you compete with that. So therefore the transactions, if you want to make it ubiquitous, you need to make sure that your transaction costs are either made it zero or at affordable to both parties. Today, still, since the ecosystems are developing, you're still charging a certain amount of money in terms of transaction. That means, yes, the fintechs have to survive, but they need to think beyond making money beyond a transaction, but how do you capitalize on certain other services that you could provide through the platform?
That's interesting, Conrad. So just if I kind of just bring some things together from what Channa said, obviously as you think about digital inclusion and you think about a population that 80% of the population that is rural, the good things that we are seeing is the level of internet penetration. You're seeing just the mobile penetration as those numbers that Channa talked about. And you're just making a really interesting point that, it's about the fintechs learning or coming together to partner in being able to do what they do best, and then kind of allow the banks to do what they do best in order to be able to converge together to be able to kind of drive those outcomes. And you made a really interesting point about costs being a key factor there, that you want to be able to remove that barrier so that that's not something that is impeding. Channa, I just want to kind of just I've got a question for you then. You're as the head of LankaClear, you've spent quite a bit of time thinking about, what this journey could look like for Sri Lanka. So as you look at the current environment, both from a regulatory perspective and from an industry perspective, what do you think are some examples or things that you'd like to call out, where things that are aiding, and where do you think we could do better with some things that potentially are impeding that point of arrival?
Thank you, Niranjan. So one of the things I think in order for us to gauge where we are and to move forward from here, we need to understand where we are. So if you really look at the landscape in the financial sector, we have issued almost 1.9 million credit cards. And we have issued, as of 2019, 23 million debit cards, but it has come down to 18 million in 2020, maybe because of COVID, banks couldn't deliver the cards, right? So I don't think it has really come down in terms of bank accounts. So which means more than 23 million bank accounts out of 21.4 million population is there. So which is heavily sort of a country with a lot of bank accounts. I don't know whether it's banked, whether I can call it bank, but country with bank accounts. But unfortunately, we have had cards for almost 2 decades, right? And we have almost 83,000 point of sale terminals in the country. But the surprising fact is, if you sort of average it out, we see that per day, number of transactions per terminal is less than 4. So which is, with 23 million debit cards and 1.4 million credit cards, nobody's really using cards, right? So when you look at that, why is this? So because we need to understand why. So one of the areas that we identified was the merchant discount rate, or the commission that was being charged by the banks from the merchants was 3 to 3.5%. And especially if you look at the SME, the profit that they make out of selling bread is 5%, and they are not willing to partake 3% out of that. So which was a no-brainer of a showstopper, right? The second one was easy access to cash. I think Conrad touched on it. You get out of the house, you have ATM. You get out of the house, you have a bank branch. So having access to cash, withdrawing cash is not a very difficult task. So people were used to it. So moving them away, we had to introduce something which is simpler than actually using cash. But say if you look at a country like Africa, in countries in Africa, M-Pesa did really well because they had to go for 500 miles to go to the next branch or the next ATM, especially with no transport available. So moving into mobile was, much easier than, in a country like Sri Lanka, because we are a cash-rich country. The third thing is actually the cycle breaking down. Now, for example, we want a tuk-tuk guy, the three-wheeler guy, to accept digital payments. So we are happy to make payments using a device, but the three-wheeler guy, when he goes to the Sunday fair, the lady never accepts cards or electronic payments. So he has to go to the ATM and withdraw cash. The cycle breaks down. So he says, I don't want card, give me cash, because at the end of the day, I need cash to buy my groceries or pump petrol, right? So which is a cycle breakdown. So unless we address this whole cycle, including the lady who sells vegetables at the fair, into digital, we will never break this, break out of this complete cycle. And also the last but not least fact in there is fear of taxes, right? As you know, most of the SMEs are scared to pay taxes because they actually maintain 2 books, one for the tax guy, one for his own purposes. So that, but the fact is the government has, increased the tax bracket, which is actually to 3 million a year or 250,000 a month per year, they don't get caught to tax bracket. So these guys are not even aware, because they don't make that much of money anyway, especially the SMEs, they're not even getting caught to the tax bracket, but it's the fear of taxes. So in order to address those, by looking at these, there were a few instruments that were introduced just to touch base on that. First, to address the merchant base, which is the SME, because they can't afford a POS terminal, which is costing about 40 to 50,000. So with central bank, we introduced the LankaClear, which is basically a sticker on a wall, and then anybody can go and scan. So 2 decades of cards in the country, we have only 83,000 terminals, but few months of LankaClear, we have more than 150,000 merchants on board LankaClear. So which is a drastic growth over the last year or so. Then we introduced for in-app payment something called Just Pay, where a customer of any bank can go and sign an app of another bank and make a payment through a debit transfer, instantaneous instant payments. And we have seen the value of transactions. These are small ticket values, 1,500, 1,000 rupee, 500 rupee, 2 billion a month, which has sort of growing exponentially every month. And also the other area is the government payments, because the customer, the citizen needs to enjoy government services. But the payment, he has to go to the bank, get a pay order, all that hassle, right? So we have introduced an online payment system with central bank, where customer can, through his internet banking, get the invoice, make a payment in real time. So customs, inland revenue, BOI, Sri Lanka Ports Authority, many other organizations in the pipeline. We have seen more than 13 billion worth of transactions happening a month as of recently. Then also we have seen the other area, peer-to-peer, person-to-person. How do I pay my plumber? How do I pay my mason? How do I pay my driver? How do I pay somebody else, instantaneously? So that is person to person. Even if I go and make a payment to the lady who sells vegetables, she's an individual, she's not a business. So it's a peer-to-peer. So we have introduced something called payment exchange name, where the receiver will have a nickname and a phone number. So all you need to do a fund transfer, all you need to know is the phone number and the nickname of that person, not the bank, the name of the bank, account number, nothing. So that system is operational. Last but not least, transport sector in Sri Lanka is all cash. So we have just introduced what we call the national card scheme, where a 2-in-1. A single card will be issued by the banks, which is your ATM card, your debit card, or a credit card, which is your transport card, tap and go. Single card. It's offline transaction on buses, online for debit payments or credit payments. And hopefully, with all these instruments in place, we feel that the platform is ready for fintechs to take it to the next level.
Channa, that's really good. Actually, just on the back of what you just shared, there's just a question here from the audience that I want to kind of see if you could take 60 seconds, nothing more than that, to respond to. It's a really good question. And the question is, how do you educate the population? Because you and I are quite familiar with digital payments and fintech and everything that's happening. But what efforts are being put in place to be able to educate the population, as it were, and bring them on this journey of digital, building this ubiquitous environment?
Yeah, actually, what we have done is something called cash vade, which is hassle of cash, in English, right? So we have launched a campaign with central bank with the support of IFC, where we have, demarcated 4 scenarios for merchants where cash is a hassle, and for consumers where cash is the hassle. So we have built up 8 use cases, 4 for merchants and 4 for consumers, to show them that using cash is a hassle, right? And so that's a campaign, national campaign, that we have been doing since actually second half of last year, during COVID pandemic. And also the other activity that we are doing, Ratapurama LankaClear, which is all island. We are covering a campaign to get merchants on board the QR and also getting consumers. So we are going to every village, every town, from month to month, having campaigns to create that awareness. So these are some of the things that we have just started, so that now that we have the instruments in place, and we have players like Conrad and others in place, so they can actually provide the instruments, but we need to create that awareness. So we are actually doing that, and I think we have a long way to go, but I think we have a good start in that.
Excellent. Thank you for that, Channa. That was good. Brad, I have a question for you, just on the back of what Conrad and Channa have spoken about. What do you believe are some of the basic building blocks that a country whether that be the regulator or the fintech industry or the banking industry needs to be thinking about to enable and deliver financial inclusion, or be able to get to where we want to from a digital inclusion perspective?
Right. Thanks. Look, first of all, I think a lot of what Channa is doing and LankaPay is doing is actually trying to build a lot of that infrastructure, which will meet a lot of those user needs. So, happy to talk a little bit about QR codes later. I think it's a great initiative, and I think it does overcome some of the challenges associated with both the costs and the complexity associated with card transactions. But maybe we can talk about that a bit later. I think in my mind, it's sort of three things that really need to exist to provide the basic building blocks. One is really a fast payments system, and I think Channa's been talking about what's been happening through LankaPay in terms of allowing for that real-time account-to-account payment, and I think that's really an essential part of building that ecosystem. The other two things are really, in my mind, digital identity. So allowing, making it easier to be able to identify who's being paid on the other end. And there's a number of initiatives looking at that. And I think digital identity is actually very important and will become more and more important as transactions increasingly move into the online space. And then thirdly, it's really around open banking. So what we're seeing in a number of jurisdictions is open banking. So effectively allowing consumers to allow third parties to have access to their data or to undertake actions on their behalf. And I think open banking, if done in the right way, can really help create an ecosystem for fintechs that is very attractive, allows them to come up with new and different types of experiences and offerings that really allow those end user experiences to happen. But at the end of the day, the payment rails need to be very robust. And I think a lot of what's happening through LankaPay is developing that strong domestic system, the rails, which allow a lot of that to be done.
No, thank you for that, Red. I think that just actually kind of those are three critical areas that you talked about. And I'm sure during the course of the next couple of days, there will be sessions that kind of dive into some of the specifics around open banking and digital identity, etc. But you mentioned there just the rails, whether it be the central bank real-time payment, the LankaClear clearing systems that they have. How do you actually see, as the markets evolve, do you see these rails kind of converging, what are your thoughts? What do you start seeing in some of the countries?
Well, we're seeing a lot of diversity at the moment. So I think we are seeing a convergence in a way. I think we're seeing more of an interest from central banks and regulators in terms of ensuring that those end user needs are done and that the infrastructure that's being provided is basically fit for purpose. And then on the industry side, I think as well too, it's really around, well, what can industry do both on a proprietary basis, but also on a collaborative basis to be able to meet some of those needs. I think what works really well, and this doesn't matter whether it's a developed or a developing market. And again, how developed and mature industry institutions are will kind of determine where you are along that continuum. But I think central banks and regulators are generally pretty good at articulating the what that needs to be done, or even the why. But I think industry players are usually much better at the how, actually the building and the delivery of those solutions. So you want to have regulators engaged, defining the public policy objectives, and financial inclusion is clearly something very important in Sri Lanka to address, but you really do want to bring industry participants along to provide what they can to deliver those end user needs.
That's very good. So Channa, just a question on the back of that for you. So how do you see these three groups coming together in Sri Lanka? And as they're coming together, what do you believe are some of the critical things they need to be focusing on? If you were to call out three things, and maybe just take about a minute and just try and see if you can. tackle that.
Thank you. I think building on what Brad was saying, absolutely digital identity is a must. That's been coming for too long. And I think in India, they have this Aadhaar system, which is sort of the back end of their entire payment rails. So this has to be in place. So that is one fundamental piece that needs to come from the government side, which I think is happening, but it's taking some time. We hope it will be here very soon. The second one is access to digital services, because I think that is a very key point, because if people are to move into this area and the consume, especially if you are going to the 81% rural population, I mean, if they have to come to Colombo or a major city to consume some of these services, that's a non-starter. So that is where I think the ICT agency is doing a lot of work in terms of getting these digital services. So I mean, all we need to do is, once the digital services are enabled, if a payment has to be charged from any of those citizens, we can enable through the fintechs and other banking apps. So which is the piece that we are providing, but the government needs to provide these services on digital, because there's no point just providing the service payment digital, but the service manual. I mean, that's a non-starter. So both pieces have to be in place. Third thing, I think the most critical part, which is also happening, which is the data protection regulation, because more and more people jumping onto the bandwagon of digital. How is their data protected? I think there is a session that is going to happen with a eminent panel on this. But that is a key piece, because people need to trust, when they submit their data, that their data will not be compromised or will not be used for any other purposes. So there has to be proper regulation in place, which is, I think, in the draft stage. We are hoping the government and the regulators will push this fast, hopefully within this year. If they get approved and in place, I think it will give a boost to the economy and boost to the players, as well as confidence to the citizens. I think these are three key areas. I think if we can do that within this year, we would see a great boost to this whole economy.
So thank you, Channa. And then Conrad, then in order to be able to kind of get regulators, industry, and industry participants coming together, what do you think are some things that they need to be mindful of to be able to kind of support the fintech industry, as it were, and encourage just the role that they can actually play in this whole in getting to this point of arrival?
I think Brad touched about this open banking. I think open banking is a next level, I would say, for us. But I think the openness of the banks have to be there for fintechs to play, meaning that partnering element, right? If they are not open in order to play with the fintech players, I think that's a fundamental thing that if the fintech industry to survive and go to make a difference. And from a fintech perspective, I think they need to build, I think Channa touched on a different perspective on this, the building the trust. They should show that they are not there to make just a one-time gain or a money, but they are here to stay for a long period of time, solving a problem of the customers. So that is something very, very important. If they are looking at, the fintechs are also looking at from a new tech company or tech giants, like making a quick valuation gain and then getting out, I don't think that you're correcting the problem that what the country has at this given moment. So they need to have that deep mindset in terms of solving the problem from a fintech player. So because we see some of these fintechs just come just as a mushroom companies, and they don't have that futuristic mindset in terms of doing it. They look at trying to solve a problem, and then they are nowhere. So that will not. They're thinking of disrupting the industry, but they're disrupting by themselves, and they're disrupting the whole future of that market as well. So that is a trust element of it, and that the banks to be open before open banking, they need to be open to see that they know we need to partner with a good tech partner or a fintech player to do this. Because I have a lot of experience in this space in terms of because iPay is not a product that which has started now, but it has been in Channa knows about it, and we have been trying to go to market for quite a long time. But thanks to LankaPay and the initiatives that the central bank has done now, we see a lot of other players coming in. So that is also very important. The other banks have to come in, so then the educational level of the consumers will go up automatically. So the more players needs to be there in this space as well. So that we have to attract and promote for new players.
Very good. We've got about 12 minutes and I've got a few more questions to get through. So Brad, I've got a question. I've got two questions actually, if I could just throw them out together for you. The first is, as we talk about, the regulators, policymakers, industry participants, as you said, all coming together, can you give us, the audience, actually 2 or 3 examples of where you're seeing some best practices on how it's happening well, that they could probably also as a country look at as we move forward? And the second is actually on the back of the question of what the comment that Channa made. What should be the balance between safety, security, privacy versus, and competition versus innovation? How do the regulators and industry get the right balance? And what's happening maybe if you can look at Australia, what are some things do you see in play that's actually supporting that strategy?
Sure. I think in terms of best practices, I'll reflect a little bit upon my experience in Australia here with the new payments platform. So the new payments platform was the new real-time payment system that was Niranjan mentioned in the introduction that began in 2018, but began operations in 2018. And I think again, what worked really well there was that the regulator, the central bank, clearly articulated what it wanted from a public policy perspective in terms of what it really wanted to achieve. And then it supported industry to come together through APCA, through the Payments Association, to effectively work collaboratively to develop and design that system, which we eventually then got a technology partner on board in the form of Swift, and spun off and created a new company and so forth. But I think finding that balance between what the regulator was doing in terms of articulating the what and the why, but leaving it to industry to really determine the how, but supporting the industry in terms of its activities. I think in terms of jurisdictions that are doing it well, I think obviously there's been mention of what India's been doing in terms of with UPI and Aadhaar, and I think obviously there's going to be examples that's going to be discussed clearly over the next couple of days. And I don't claim to be an expert in that, but clearly there's a lot of very interesting things happening there. I think Singapore has really done very well as a jurisdiction, trying to put itself out as a leader in terms of fintech in the region. So I think one thing that has happened in Singapore is really this sort of whole of industry approach, where government, the central bank, the monetary authority of Singapore, the banks, technology providers, and so forth have all come together to really craft a real, strong vision and roadmap for Singapore to be a fintech leader for the region. So again, a lot of it is around collaboration. A lot of it is around working together. I think Conrad makes a very good point around the banks need to be open to fintech providers. And I think finding those partnerships is really where the value is going to be unlocked. I think in terms of finding that balance between competition, innovation, safety, and security, again, I think this is where policymakers in particular need to really be prepared to challenge sort of the status quo and traditional ways of thinking. They need to be prepared to think creatively around how can end user needs be met in a more efficient and effective way, and really sort of challenge incumbents when they're saying, well, this isn't going to work, or it's too hard, or it's too expensive, or what. They are going to have to challenge that to a certain degree, and to find that better balance. Because again, yes, payments are clearly important from the economic well-being of the country, but again, there's a lot of opportunities for competition and innovation. And I think that regulators really need to be creative and think hard about how they can promote that.
Excellent. Thank you, Brad. That was there's a lot to think about from what you just said there. Channa, if I could just actually kind of direct this next question at you, towards you at least, as you think about, from your role, you have the opportunity to kind of interact regularly with the regulators, policymakers, the industry, you see the need that's out there, and you have a vision for what digital inclusion in a ubiquitous environment could look like. Paint for us a picture of what you would love to see as what Sri Lanka could look like, and what would it take to get there?
Yes, I think Niranjan, let me just briefly tell you what is actually happening and what is coming in the future, and it's actually already on us. For example, Central Bank has something called National Payments Council, and there is a roadmap that is put out called Payment System Roadmap of National Payment Council. And we also have a separate initiative called National Financial Inclusivity Strategy, which was recently launched by the governor of the Central Bank. Actually, the Prime Minister launched it. So under that, we have actually looked at 4 areas, Central Bank is driving and with committees. One is enabling digital KYC. So which is a very crucial part of actually getting, banks on, especially if you take the younger generation, obviously they are not going to fill forms. So KYC in a digital form. So there is an initiative which is happening. Hopefully we will see some solutions coming out in that space. The next one is obviously regulatory sandbox, which actually central banks launch, so that the fintechs will have, hopefully in a limited infrastructure, in a framework where they can experiment with several fintech solutions. So which is part of that, which was also launched last year or somewhere there. And then we also have a committee which is actually looking into open banking and looking at what are the possible ways, what has happened in other countries, and how can we sort of adopt those for the benefit of the citizens of this country, as well as businesses and the SMEs, and fintechs, where they can actually with ease, they can actually join, banking services and collaboration, as I think very correctly Conrad pointed out. And also, we are also looking at what we call the digital payment platform to provide a single interface to the consumer, where backend there could be multiple instruments, multiple applications, but for a consumer not to get confused by multiple interfaces, to have a single interface, but that will integrate with different platforms, whether it's cards, payments, digital payments, and other areas. I think last but not least, I think one of the fundamental things, I think Conrad touched on this, payment is only one small segment of the whole equation, right? So there is a document process, there's other process. Now, most of these documents are manual, right? But we have been having a certificate authority in operation since 2009, and Electronic Transactions Act, which enables a digital signature to be valid in a court of law for a long time, right? And, more and more people adopting digital signatures, they don't need to go on-premise. Actually, they can, consume services, exchange documents which are required for a transaction, electronically. I think, more and more people adopting this, would we see greater, adoption of all the services. Last but not least, I think fintechs, the advice to the fintechs is, everybody wants to get into the payments bandwagon, but what about the other environment, like providing services? Because obviously, I won't go and get Uber or Pick Me just to make a payment to the three-wheeler guy. I'm getting, tracking so many other facilities which are beneficial for me. So actually the service that I consume is going from A to B, and payment is only a byproduct. So more and more fintechs need to start thinking beyond payments. They need to provide services, digital services that will be consumed by the consumers and citizens. Then more and more people will get into digital services, and obviously a byproduct of that will be digital payments, which are already, I think, on the way to digitizing. But I think more and more fintechs need to provide those value-added services and partner with banks and others in collaboration to take this journey. I think if we do that, then we will go on this digital learning journey of reaching this 81% rural population. Otherwise, we will never get there.
That's interesting. You say that in Australia, for example, I think out of the fintechs, even I think I was looking at the January 2021 report, only about 20% of the fintechs are actually focused on payments. The rest are focused on a number of other areas, which is really interesting. Conrad, just your thoughts as we kind of we've got 4 minutes more to finish, and I've got one more question for Brad. Just with those comments that Channa made, and the Payments Council and those key priorities, what are your thoughts?
Oh, I think I totally agree with Channa. I think at the start also I mentioned that fintechs have to look at beyond payments. I think that is something that we need to look at from a fintech perspective. However, I think to get the adoption, I think I like to invite at this given moment, if there are any corporates, any companies who are there, any accountants or the finance teams who are here listening, I think they should be the trendsetters in terms of this bandwagon. Because I think even we talk about this fintech and the payments and the payment ecosystem, still the community who's working in these banks are not adopted it. People who are in the organizations who are in the finance and accounting side have not adopted it. Now there are solutions which are there in the organization which will increase the efficiency. Payment, it's not the retail payment, but there are technology-driven corporate payment solutions which are there today with us. With Channa mentioned a lot in terms of the government payment. Those things can be replicated to the corporate. So I think the adoption is a very critical, important thing. So I think invite all these CXO level people who are listening today to take that initiative with the banks, with your bank, with the fintechs, in order to drive the whole payment ecosystems.
That's good, Conrad. I think just we're almost on time, but just as we finish, Brad, as the government then works on those four strategic pillars Channa spoke about, what do you believe are 3 key things they would need to keep in mind?
Look, I think they really need to keep in mind trying to, first of all, make sure that they're solving real problems in that current environment. And I think we've all talked about this, that it's really sort of getting down to that next level, making sure that services can be provided that actually meet real end user needs. So I think that's really the first thing. I think the second thing is to really think about, well, the gap between what we have and what we want. And every jurisdiction is different. So I think it's important for both industry and policymakers to look at what's unique within the environment and to sort of make sure that they're not just adopting something from an overseas jurisdiction just because it looks right. I mean, every jurisdiction is different, and it's important that it makes sure that it's modified and adapted for that local environment. And then I think thirdly, looking at international examples. I think clearly looking at what's happening in other jurisdictions is important. Looking at what's happening in the region and globally is very important. And there's a lot of good examples of what's happening in both developed and developing markets. I think just really briefly, as you can tell probably from my accent, I'm originally from Canada. So as a Canadian who spent most of my life living very close to the United States, I understand living in a smaller country close to a very large country as well too, and the challenges associated with that. So I think it's important that one thing I've learned working with Payments Canada is that, yes, we need to be very alive to what's happening in the United States in terms of what's happening in their payment market. But at the same time, any changes that we do need to meet the needs of real Canadian businesses and consumers. So we always have to keep in mind that our market is different than their market. There are similarities, but there are differences. So by understanding those similarities and those differences, we're able to make some better decisions that really allow us to meet the needs of the Canadian economy and Canadian end users.
Excellent, Brad. Brad and I, just given the nature of the experience that we've had the opportunity to work across a number of countries, both in Asia and in this region. As we think about even Australia today, it's actually, whilst the regulators, the banks, and had priorities that they were trying to fulfill, it's at the end of the day, the convenience that was delivered to clients, customers, that actually has brought about the change. I was just looking at a recent report which talks about 91% of Australians actually kind of, are, very happy with, doing things online and in a digital environment. It's actually overshadowing the numbers across banks. And you look at buying behavior, you look at contactless in Australia, which is almost, exceeded 91% now. And so this is like for any country, this is a journey, what you're doing in Sri Lanka, and conversations like this are important to be able to kind of get regulators, policymakers, industry leaders, but also based on the question we had, bringing the customers on a journey from an education perspective, are all critical components of being able to build a ubiquitous environment. So I want to finally thank the panelists here. You've just actually, all of you bring a tremendous amount of experience and knowledge to the table. And it's just been fantastic to be able to have this dialogue with you today. Thank you again. And I hope you, the audience, have enjoyed this session and you've taken some notes of things that you would want to follow up and dig a little deeper and learn as you kind of, even as Conrad talked about, whether you're a leader in the corporate world, you're in the private sector, you're in the public sector, about all of us trying to see what we can do across our space to be able to drive this point of arrival outcome. Thank you again. I hope you enjoyed the session.
Thank you. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Brad, Channa, Conrad.
Thank you.
Really enjoyed it.
Thank you, Niranjan.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you. Thanks, Niranjan.